would like to start the session, and I would like to guide you through the agenda. We have now already done the opening, the welcome and introduction. We will go into the second part, which is an impulse on disaster risk and readiness for insurance solution in small island developing states. And there is an InsuRisk assessment tool, and we will be presented with its findings. Right after, we will look into our host country, the Fiji country profile, presented by our dear Fiji representative. After that, we will come and look into a 1 hour, 15-minute panel discussion. We'll share experiences, we'll get a regional learning, and we'll see also Fiji's strategy for comprehensive disaster risk financing, but also more, as we learn from our dear panelists about the Pacific regions, about further solutions. And in the end, we'll wrap up and close the session. I'm very happy now to introduce the first speech. This is the impulse speech. And this is on the latest findings of the InsuRisk assessment tool for on a study on the small island development states. And this will be presented by Dr. Vineil Hagenlocher from the United Nations University Institute for Environment and Human Security. Well, I mean, just to introduce that, probably you have attended our sessions and you have come across the second day that was kickstarted by an impulse by Ekosoe Yan from the Insurance Development Forum. And she was talking about the importance of understanding risks better and how important risk analytics is for further development. Understanding risk is key. This is why the InsuResilience Secretariat commissioned a study to the United Nations University to develop this topic further in 2017. The focus of this study has been led on preparing a comprehensive concept methodology and tool that provides a transparent and comparable baseline information on countries' climate and disaster risks and their readiness for risk transfer through insurance solutions. The resulting InsuRisk assessment tool has been designed to provide the following answers to the questions: what is the level of exposure, vulnerability, and climate and disaster risks of a country? And what is a country's readiness to accommodate insurance solutions? The InsuResilience InsuRisk assessment tool does not indicate when a country might be affected by disaster, but it highlights the risks of being confronted with adverse impacts associated with climate-related and natural hazards, using most recent publicly available data with global coverage of each of its components and subcomponents. We are currently developing an updated version that will be publicly available on the website of InsuResilience by 2021. And as a disclaimer, this is the starting point of a longer journey to have a more comprehensive look at disasters, understanding how to analyze the risks better. And it will be also a kind of reality check also already here within this session. We are very happy if the audience, if you are providing feedback to this study and help us developing it further. Now, in this current report, we have a closer look on the situation and availability of data for the small developing island states. Dr. Vineil Hagenlocher, the floor is yours.
Thank you very much, Astrid, for the kind introduction and the framing. Good morning, good afternoon, and good evening, dear colleagues, distinguished guests, and friends. And a very warm welcome also from my side. It's a real pleasure for me to join you today for this session. which also marks the day and time of the official launch of our 2020 InsuRisk special report on, as Astrid has already explained, disaster risk and readiness for insurance solutions with a geographic focus on small island developing states. Let me maybe use the next few minutes to give you a little bit of an introduction into the background of the report. So I think we are all aware that as a result of global environmental change and notably climate change, but also land use change, rapid urbanization, and the associated increases in exposure to climate-related extreme events and natural hazards, risk is actually on the rise in many countries across the globe and often leading to devastating impacts for communities, livelihoods, and in turn also hampering progress towards the Sustainable Development Goals. As highlighted in the recently published IPCC special report on the oceans and the cryosphere, this is particularly the case for small islands, not only small island developing states, small islands in general, but also small island developing states, where it is anticipated that risks are already high today, but they might even be disproportionately higher in the coming decades compared to other countries across the world. Against this background, I think we all agree that it's very important to have accelerated action, but also investments to increase resilience through targeted and efficient risk reduction, risk financing, risk transfer, in order to help those communities and countries better deal with those challenges. Against this background, it's very important to have a more nuanced understanding, to understand what are the drivers, what are the spatial patterns of disaster risk in all the dimensions of exposure to climate-related extreme events and natural hazards, but also vulnerability. And this is a very important first step to support the implementation of a needs-based or needs-centric risk management or comprehensive risk management approach, and to support those ongoing needs and efforts, which for SIDS, for example, have also been clearly stated in high-level policy agendas, such as the Samoa pathway, for example. We have conducted for the first time a comprehensive study where we, in a comparative analysis based on publicly available data, analyzed the country's climate and disaster risk, as well as, and Astrid has highlighted it already, this is one of the novelties of this tool, their readiness to accommodate insurance solutions with a geographic focus on the 38 small island developing states, which are also part of the United Nations. Now I have to look. Here on the screen, you see the cover photo, the title page of our report, as well as the partners who were involved in this, as well as the conceptual diagram. And as you can see in this conceptual diagram, our analysis considers 7 climate-related extreme events and natural hazards from floods, droughts, earthquakes, storms, storm surges, etc., to assess the exposure. So the presence of people, agricultural land, economic production, and infrastructure to those hazards, as well as a quite large variety of socioeconomic, environmental, and infrastructure-related vulnerability indicators to assess risk. And in addition, we considered 6 different indicators that were identified together with experts from the insurance industry and the Secretariat, and in a large consultation process, 6 indicators that should help us to understand how ready a country is to accommodate insurance solutions. Let me very briefly, time is very short, so I have to keep it short, but let me very briefly give you a little bit of insight into some of the key findings. So first of all, and here I would like to make 4 points. First of all, our analysis really shows that, and this is not very surprising, I think, for many of us in the virtual room, shows that the majority of small island developing states, including many in the Pacific, are very highly exposed to multiple hazards. And next to slow onset events like sea level rise, particularly cyclones and storm surges are a major challenge for many of the countries. In some of the other regional clusters, for example, the Caribbean and the Pacific, also earthquake are quite a challenge. Second, the second point is on the vulnerability of those countries. That determines often more than the exposure, the actual impact. And here, the fact that SIDS often have a comparatively small economic basis, a high dependency on specific sectors. I think we all see this these days with COVID and the dependency on tourism, for example, but also high debt serving burdens or poverty rates, and oftentimes limited coping capacities. Many of these countries are actually highly vulnerable to those events. Third, when looking at the readiness for insurance solutions component of the analysis, our analysis has actually also revealed that there are very stark differences, both across SIDS, but also across the regional clusters. So, for example, our analysis showed that Timor-Leste or Mauritius, Singapore, or Jamaica have a very high readiness, while, for example, on average, the readiness to accommodate insurance solutions is highest in the Pacific cluster. Now, while this sounds very promising on the first side, we also have to keep in mind, and here this is my fourth point, that despite this high readiness of multiple of the SIDS countries, their small market size often leaves SIDS quite unattractive for the insurance industry. And we believe that in order to overcome those challenges, that regional approaches, but also public-private partnerships might be one useful way forward to help those countries to access sovereign risk insurance that is appropriate to their needs and responding to the risk setting that these countries are confronted with. And with this, I would like to close my short statement, invite you all to have a more detailed look at the report. I believe it will be shared today, and encourage you, and reiterate the statement of Astrid, encourage you wholeheartedly to share your comments and feedbacks with us in order to help us to come up with a tool that in the end is useful for all of us and all of you, and notably for the people who are at risk. With this, many thanks, and over to Astrid. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Michael, for this very interesting insight. And you're right, the report is up as of today on our website to be joined and to be further developed by your feedback. But it was already quite good impulse for our discussions. You mentioned various interesting items and issues that are involved with small island developing states. You mentioned the high variety of the situations of the different countries here. You mentioned that we have to have a deeper look into the needs of and into the particularities of these countries. You mentioned the market size, also quite interesting, and how to overcome challenges. I would like now, as we are getting into the mood of the island states and so and the region, I would like now to open a little poll, and I look into my team here. We have a nice little poll. It will be the link will be shared in the chat in a minute, so you have the opportunity to select your responses. Now we have questions for you. How many islands are in the Pacific? And the second question is, in which sport did Fiji win the gold medal at the Olympics in 2016? And the third question, what was the value of economic losses due to natural hazards that the Asia-Pacific region faced in 2019? Please make your choice and submit. And you have a short time limit. You can see that in the chat link. And please make your selection now. So this is how we get a little bit more into the mood, into the region, into the specifica. We'll see what your answers will look like, and I can also share the right answer right away. I think we are slowly coming to an end. Not yet. There's some still undecisive. Now we have the responses. We see how many islands are in the Pacific. And quite interesting, quite a big spread. Some didn't answer, but we can say that response B is the right one. So we have 25,000 islands in the Pacific. We look at the sports, and this is right. The rugby was where Fiji won the gold medal in the Olympics in 2016. And what was the value of economic losses? And it was not 92 billion, it was 107 billion US dollars. So even more than the majority of you have voted. So very sad record indeed. Now, thank you very much for your selection. We can continue. And I would like to now, after this impulse and food for thought, turn to our distinctive panel and our country case presenter. And I will ask everybody of my dear panelists to open the video and to also open your microphone as we are coming to your short introductions. So I can see step by step the videos are opening, and we have now also the list of our dear panelists in front of us. You should see them. I will ask everybody one after the other to present quickly the affiliation and the personal background of himself and speak up for about maximum 1 minute. And I will start with our host country, Vineil. Vineil Narayan, please, would you present and introduce yourself?
Thank you very much, Astrid, and Bulavanaka to everyone. It's a pleasure to be here. My name is Vineil Narayan. I have been working in the Pacific for the past 7 years on national economic planning, national budget programming, economic and climate policy development. So I've been stationed with the Ministry of Economy and very much working to mainstream climate change into the fiscal policy space of government. In addition to that, I have just assumed the role of acting head of climate change in International Cooperation Division, which I have been the division that I have been part of for the past 3 years. So happy to be taking this role. But on a full-time basis, I am the climate finance specialist working on various mechanisms within the country as well as within the region, particularly focusing on disaster risk insurance and climate financing as well. So happy to be here, and I have a presentation that I would more than eager to present. So looking forward to that as well. So Naka.
Thank you very much, Vineil. We come to your presentation right after the introduction of the entire panel, but I want to give also the chance for the other panelists to present themselves quickly. And our next panelist is Vijay Kalavakonda. Vijay, please.
Hi, Astrid, and welcome to all the participants, and thanks to the InsuResilience Secretariat for organizing the session. My name is Vijay Kalavakonda. I'm part of the World Bank Group. I used to be with the World Bank until for about 10 plus years, moved to the private sector arm of the World Bank, which is the International Finance Corporation. And that's when we started a project in Fiji, focusing on Pacific for more than about 3 plus years. We were engaged in Fiji, trying to address and come up with solutions for non-sovereign type of risk, and more so targeting the private sector, both the retail as well as the the institutional segment of the economy in Fiji. And more than happy to share some of those perspectives. And now back into the IFC. I'm now part of the South Asia region within IFC. So let me stop there.
Vijay, thank you very much for this quick introduction. I would like to hand over to Mr. Arolotu Palu, please. Mr. Palu, you're still muted. If you please could open your microphone. That sounds good.
Thank you. Thank you, Astrid, and thank you for the InsuResilience Global Partnership Secretariat for this well-done organization for this event. And greeting to the participants. My name is Arolotu Palu. I'm the CEO for the Pacific Catastrophe Risk Insurance, or known to be short PCRIT. Which is based in Cook Islands, but unfortunately because of COVID situations, I'm stuck here in Fiji for now until the borders will reopen up. I've been working for government, regional organization, and also international organization, including the World Bank, for the last 25 years. And I'm currently I'm a public finance management expert and also a climate finance expert in that space. My last role was with GIZ and also the Pacific Island Forum Secretariat. I was working for the government of Tonga, reaching to the apex of the Civil 7 organizational structure as a chief secretary and secretary to cabinet, before also become an acting CEO for Ministry of Finance and head of the budget procurement aid management back in the days. Thank you, and happy to be here.
Thank you very much. This is an impressive vita and an impressive experience package. So we will benefit a lot from your input, I'm sure, as well. Now to the next panelist, Josh Ling. Please, Josh.
Thanks, Astrid, and thanks also to InsuResilience Secretariat for organizing the event and for the invitation to participate. My name is Josh Ling. I joined the Asian Development Bank in April of this year as a climate change specialist, but also as the fund manager of ACLIF, which is the Asia Pacific Climate Finance Fund. And ACLIF aims to support the design and implementation of financial risk management instruments that have as an objective to scale up investment into climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation. Originally, I'm from Australia. I worked a few years as an actuary in Australia, but the last 10 years, having lived in different parts of the world, been working on disaster risk financing and financial inclusion. Thanks very much.
Thank you very much. And now, last but not least, Mr. Sayed Hossein, please, the floor is yours.
Thank you to the organizers. And good morning and good evening, good afternoon to you all. My name is Syed Hussain. Currently, I'm the acting Chief Executive Officer of the Development Bank in Fiji. Prior to this, I held the position of General Manager of Finance and Administration. By profession, I'm a chartered accountant. As you all are aware, that Fiji Development Bank is the only bank in the Fiji providing funding for the development of SMEs and catering for other commercial loans, basically for the development of the country. So basically, I'll stop there and thank you for giving me this opportunity to be part of the panel.
Thank you very much for this introduction. I'm very much looking forward to the discussion. They will be very rich given the high diversity of experiences. Now I'm coming, and I don't hold back. Vineil, I'm coming to you. You will present the special country case, Fiji, the Fiji Islands. I just want to mention that we have a very special relationship to Fiji because in 2017, President Bainimarama of Fiji at the COP23 has launched the InsuResilience Global Partnership as a founding member. So we have a very strong and very dear relationship to the Fiji Islands. And now we are happy that we can hear from you, Vineil, about the country profile of Fiji, about an overview of what the major risks are and how Fiji is using climate and disaster risk management in a more comprehensive, in a more strategic way. The floor is yours, Vineil.
Thank you very much, Astrid. And indeed, we do have a very special relationship with the InsuResilience partnership, and very much looking forward to building on that in the future. Just allow me to set myself up. Okay, can you see my screen? Okay. So, hello everyone. It's once again it's a pleasure to be here. My presentation today will take you through a quick country profile of Fiji, focusing on how we are addressing climate and disaster risk through innovative financing solutions here. My presentation will be divided into three parts. The first will give you an overview of Fiji's climate and disaster risk profile. The second will elaborate on Fiji's strategy to climate and disaster risk financing. And the third will discuss existing initiatives and way forward as to how we are planning to address our climate and disaster risk exposure. So for those of you who do not know, I'm pretty sure that you are all familiar with this. The total population for Fiji is 884,000, just over that, and the median age of our population is around 27.5 years, and 69% of the population is less than 40 years. So it's a very young population that we have, and with regards to the urban-rural divide, the urban population is around 55.9%, whilst the rural population is around 44.1%. Total number of households as of 2017 was 194,235. Of this amount, 150,678, or 82% of this amount, earns a total income of less than $30,000. So this number of households, this 82% of the housing stock, is considered to be low-income households, and of course, the most vulnerable to the impact of climate change. But what do I mean by vulnerable to the impacts of climate change? Let me get into that in my next slide. First and foremost, climate change and natural disasters are the single greatest threat to Fiji's development aspirations, particularly our development aspirations is articulated in our 5 and 20-year National Development Plan. A quick fact that I wanted to highlight was that the average asset losses due to tropical cyclones and floods in Fiji are estimated to be more than 250 million per year, representing more than 5% of our GDP. So there is a substantial amount of damage and losses that we suffer. So it's more so if we are not careful, if we are not proactive in managing our climate and disaster risks, it's more so one step forward with our development aspirations and two step backwards because of this. The second point is Fiji, along with its Pacific neighbors, is amongst the most climate vulnerable countries in the world. Of course, it's a well-known fact. But the fact is that the Pacific accounts for only 0.1% of the world's population, but suffers 2.3% of disasters globally. In addition to that, we only contribute 0.3% to global greenhouse gas emissions, but tend to suffer the most when it comes to its repercussions to climate change. The third point that I wanted to highlight, and most appropriate to this presentation or the topic of our discussions today, is that naturally adaptation and resilience are national priorities for Fiji. In particular, innovative financial mobilization is of paramount importance to us. I'd just like to further articulate our vulnerability, our risk to natural disasters and climate-induced natural disasters in particular by putting up the slide here. What the slide shows is a diagrammatic representation of recent cyclone events that we have suffered in Fiji since Tropical Cyclone Winston in 2016. The Tropical Cyclone Winston is marked in the black pathway on the screen. Since that natural disaster event had wiped out close to 1/3 of our GDP and actually took us, reversed our years of development progress by many years. And since then, we have experienced 7 tropical cyclones. 2 were Category 1, 2 were Category 2, and 3 were Category 4. So that equates to approximately at least one major natural disaster happening every year. So I just wanted to put this up onto the screen and just underscore the fact that our degree or the degree of vulnerability to climate and disaster risk is extremely high in Fiji. almost likewise with most other Pacific Island countries. This is a particular slide that I wanted to show to very much humanize that disaster risk. Our vulnerability to climate and disaster risk impedes our social security and human rights. It negates progress made in education and healthcare. It contributes significantly to loss of livelihoods and also to diminished food security, and of course, loss of homes and assets. There's a unique picture on the top left of this slide, and I wanted to put it there because it has a story behind it. That baby in the esky or the cooler that you see actually survived Tropical Cyclone Winston because her parents had actually put her into that esky so that she would be safe from prevailing winds. So it was a powerful story that I really wanted to share and just exemplifies the level of vulnerability that our communities in the Pacific face. Having underscored all the previous points or the points so far, I want to take you into how Fiji is actually strategizing climate and disaster risk financing. So before I get into the details proper, I just wanted to highlight some of the key challenges and obstacles that we face in Fiji in this regard. First and foremost, disaster risk reduction policies, plans, and strategies do not entail in-depth disaster risk financing solutions. So Fiji has a disaster risk response or that disaster risk reduction policy rather. But what we have found out when we did a in-depth analysis of the policy was that options regarding the operationalization and mobilization of finance to actually achieve some of the deliverables of that policy is lacking. Secondly, there's a disproportionate burden on government fiscal resources to respond to climate and disaster risks. In particular, this requires substantial relocation of national budgets and of course, it derails national development efforts as well. Now, this leads into a very recent situation that we are in at the moment. COVID-19 has actually substantially reduced Fiji's capacity for sovereign insurance solutions because of the fact that we cannot bear the burden of actually paying premiums that are exuberant at the moment as we go through a fiscal crunch. An exemplification of this fiscal crunch is the fact that the Fijian government had actually set up a taxation mechanism called the Environment and Climate Adaptation Levy that basically pre-COVID used to bring us about approximately Fijian 180 million or US 60 million every year to facilitate and finance our environment and climate adaptation efforts. And we were actually eyeing this allocation to actually subscribe to sovereign insurance coverage in the near future. However, post-COVID, this fund has actually reduced a bit from 180 million Fijian dollars to around 26 million post-COVID, because a lot of this, a lot of the mechanisms that resource this taxation mechanism rather is actually consumption based, and COVID-19 has actually reduced economic activity, reduced the number of tourists coming into the country, and actually, in essence, has reduced the level of funds that we are able to draw from this particular levy. The next point is, of course, that there's limited fiscal capacity to retain our entire climate and disaster risk. There's an absolute need to synergize multiple financial modalities so we are able to spread out our climate and disaster risks. And in that regard, Fiji is ready to work smart by spreading its climate and disaster risk across multiple modalities through a risk layering approach. And that is something that I want to explain further in this particular slide. Those of you who are practitioners in this field would have already know this, but I wanted to emphasize that Fiji is actually driving our strategy to address climate and disaster risk based on the principles that are articulated or shown in this particular diagram. So, first and foremost, the Fijian government, or Fiji in particular, has been really good at risk retention and developing financing modalities within the first and second layer of this layered approach. In particular, we have developed various national reserves and calamity funds at the national level that I will talk about in my next slide as well. And we have also developed contingent credit lines as well, or rather or established contingent credit lines with our development partners. But having analyzed our climate and disaster risk we realized that there was a significant lack of risk transfer mechanisms that are being employed by Fiji, and that has actually prompted us to develop something called a climate and disaster risk financing strategy for Fiji that would actually be articulating how we in Fiji would be using these various modalities that you see on the screen in a very coherent and a very strategic manner to operationalize our disaster risk policies, as well as our strategies and mechanisms that would contribute towards building adaptation and resilience in Fiji. So, having said that, what we have done is undertaken a quick analysis of where do we stand in terms of our risk bearing in Fiji, in particular with regards to financing our climate and disaster risks. So as I mentioned, Fiji has actually done really well in establishing reserves and calamity funds. As I mentioned earlier, the Environment Climate Adaptation Levy is in place. Of course, that is now diminished, but of course it is there, and it brings or it gives us an availability of about $60 million in funding to address climate disaster risk as well. We also have established something called the Climate Relocation of Communities Trust Fund, which is at the moment resourced to up to $2.5 million with assistance from the government of New Zealand. This particular trust fund is there to provide immediate relief and assistance to communities who are in need of urgent relocation because of climate and disaster risks. So that is there in place. And we also have a disaster relief and rehabilitation fund that is accessible directly to our National Disaster Management Office that they can tap into immediately as soon as the disaster happens. In terms of contingent credit lines, we have proactively, as recently as 3 to 4 months ago, set up a standby concessional loan agreement with the government of Japan. It's given us access, or rather gives us access to $50 million in disaster relief efforts. We are also a IDA country, and so that gives us access to the crisis response window for IDA. Of course, Vijay may be better able to explain this further. The next point, or the next facility that we have at the moment, we're actually negotiating with the World Bank to have access to a CAPDDO mechanism, CAPDDO being catastrophic drawdown facility mechanism, that would be more so a trigger-based policy-based loan, where we would be able to access in upwards of $10 million should a natural disaster hit. Now, as I mentioned, these are all risk retention tools that we have, and we have done quite well in establishing these facilities for ourselves. But like I said, where we are lacking is the insurance and reinsurance space. And so we have decided that we would be focusing a lot more in insurance and reinsurance, as well as accessing capital markets through catastrophic bonds and other securities. So, but my focus today for this presentation will be on insurance and reinsurance. The Fijian government's focus is on filling this void by developing a bottom-up solution for the most vulnerable in society. What we are doing is we want to develop a parametric macro-insurance solution that is first and foremost piloted before scaling. This solution needs to be means and market tested to suit user needs. Again, insurance and reinsurance solutions are a fairly new concept when it comes to climate and disaster risks. So we want to first trial, engage in agile development before scaling. Of course, we would want to get the private sector on board as well. They need to be there from the start within this whole pilot phase, so eventually they are familiar with it and they are willing to take on this product further down the line. The next, of course, is we would like to scale up this pilot initiative, this parametric pilot initiative that we are developing through regional risk pools, particularly through PICRIC. And of course, this needs to be very much discussed further with PICRIC and Olotu. I'm really glad that Olotu is at the fore of PICRIC, so we can take this conversation forward. And of course, COVID-19 has declined, or rather declined our capacity to engage in sovereign level insurance solutions. So what we want to do again is pilot first, get to a point where we are confident that this product, insurance and insurance product that we would be developing, would actually eventually be able to be scaled up in the most efficient and cost-effective manner. Now, as I want to take you through existing initiatives and way forward. What are we doing in particular? So, as I mentioned, with regards to parametric microinsurance, we are working with the United Nations Capital Development Fund, particularly through the Pacific Insurance and Climate Adaptation Program, to create a parametric microinsurance product for low-income farmers, fisher folks, MSMEs, and the tourism sector. So, this would largely focus on micro and meso groups. The first pilot phase that I was just talking about on my previous slide will look at assisting approximately 1,500 to 2,000 households, 50% of which we are targeting to ensure that there's 50% of which would be women and women-led businesses and households. Of course, what we are doing now is to take this product forward is developing or rather trying to develop additional product parameters as well as gather additional data sources to lower the cost of the product. And we are also working through cooperatives being farming groups, fisher groups, and so on and so forth, who are aggregators in these particular focus areas of ours to disseminate this insurance solution. The reason why we are working with these cooperatives and aggregators is that we have found that it's the most easiest way to administer microinsurance products, because these fisher folks, farmers, MSMEs, so on and so forth, they subscribe to these aggregators, these cooperatives. And what we are planning to do is use these cooperatives to proactively buy this parametric insurance solution on behalf of their members. And as and when the members provide subscription fees and so on and so forth, they are able to pay back the cooperatives for buying this parametric insurance solution on their behalf. Now, once we have done that, we want to then move towards the regional space and work with PICRIC to scale this product up further. And so Fiji is a member of the Pacific Catastrophe Risk Insurance Foundation, and is working with the PICRIC team to develop a private sector cell, hopefully, for which can then eventually offer reinsurance solutions to local insurers in Fiji. The plan is to scale up the parametric microinsurance product that I've just talked about in PICRIC. The Fijian government wants to incubate and pilot this product first through a mechanism called the Draw Incubator that we have developed. The Draw Incubator is more so a think tank that is now guiding all of Fiji's climate and disaster risk financing solutions, and we have actually through the Draw Incubator came up with the strategies that I'm talking to you about. Of course, eventually we would want to offload this pilot project that we are developing to local insurance providers. They've already shown substantial interest. Two local insurance providers and one reinsurer has come on board and said they want to engage with us to develop this pilot initiative. And of course, eventually we hope that PICRIC will be able to provide additional reinsurance support to local insurers. The rationale behind this is that the Fijian government cannot carry on in perpetuity to administer these projects. Eventually, we would want to have an exit strategy that we would offload this product to the private sector. Buying is extremely important from there. And lastly, I'd just like to highlight that we are also working to strengthen our local data sources as well, and that would contribute towards improved insurance product modeling and so on and so forth. But in particular, one initiative, one tool that I wanted to highlight was the Common Sensing Project tool. And basically what you see on the screen is a snapshot of what this tool offers us. And I see synergy with the tool that was just discussed at the beginning of our session today. And we'd like to take this discussion on further bilaterally through the InsuResilience partnership on how we can synergize both these tools to create a powerful mechanism for understanding and modeling climate and disaster risk in Fiji. So the common sensing tool basically is more so a initiative that had come about with assistance from the UK Space Agency and the Commonwealth Secretariat. The common sensing project takes on board various satellite imagery data, local data sets, particularly through surveys from the Fiji Bureau of Statistics and so on and so forth, and compiles them into a very interactive mapping tool that gives us exposure to hazards, vulnerability to various socioeconomic factors, as well as giving us an overview of the coping capacity of specific areas in Fiji. In fact, it's very detailed. As you click on the various maps that are highlighted in different shades, you will be able to get a quick analysis of these three areas of exposure, vulnerability, and lack of coping capacity. And this is expected to very much contribute to the pilot parametric insurance solution that we are developing. It's very much an important and powerful knowledge tool that we think that we would be able to expand further and build on, and eventually be able to use this to create new and additional financing solutions, particularly in the insurance and reinsurance space for climate and disaster risks. So with that said, I'll end my presentation, but I'm happy to engage in questions and answers further. Thank you very much.
Thank you very much, Vineil, for this fantastic overview about the situation in the Fiji Islands. And I've enjoyed very much the very good deep dive you have provided into your country. I do not see immediate questions in the chat function, but please, dear audience, if you like, please enter the first questions. I would like also to give the opportunity, and I would be happy if the panelists, my dear panelists, if you opened up the video right now, if you switched on the video, that we can see everybody. Do you have immediate questions to Vineil's overview about the situation here in the Fiji Islands? Any immediate question? Just step in or raise your hand. I don't see immediate hands. So everything seems to be so clear so far. I think we should, in order to get into the mood of being more active, I'll suggest a little poll right now again. And I would like to ask my dear team here to open the second set of icebreaker and poll, please. So before we go into the panel discussion, we have another engagement question. So please have a look at the chat window. How many millimeters of increase in sea level has Fiji recorded every year since 1993? And then how many out of 10 nations in the world most affected by climate change are in the Asian Pacific region? So please select your response, click on it, submit it so that we can see your choices. I'll do the same here. It's working. It should work for you as well. We'll have some few seconds left until we see the responses. Do I get a sign from the team here? Responses are coming in slowly. So, is it? Yes, here we go. We have responses from you. And it's quite well that we see that is 6 millimeter is the right number. Answer response B for the first question. And for the second question, we have 6. So we have the response number C, and this is also where the majority has, which the majority has selected. Thank you very much. So far, for the icebreaker, I get a sign. Please, this panelists, share your video. That would be very nice now. I can see a few, not everybody. It would be good to see everybody. Mr. Palu, I think you're still missing in the panel. So, good. I would like to look into the panel discussion right now. And Vineil, we have seen this impressive approach you're doing on the comprehensive and on the layered strategy you have selected to respond. We also have seen that, and now I'm relating to the current crisis situation. We have seen that there's a challenge that came up, and you showed us the amount of funding that has gone down. So given the COVID-19 burden, we would like to know how is the situation tackled currently within the Fiji Islands. What are you going to do? What is the intention of how to tackle and still be able to manage climate and disaster risk finance and insurance under this situation? And after your response, Vineil, I would like to look into the larger picture and would like to ask Josh also to come up and explain here a little bit, and also introducing the ACLE, for example, this instrument in your region. So first, Vineil, the question, how do you tackle the COVID-19 situation? How do you tackle the lack of funds that are here? Do you have somehow buffer capacities or do you get support?
Thanks, Astrid, for that question. To be honest, Fiji has been experiencing substantial amount of fiscal contraction. About 21% of our GDP has actually declined because of COVID-19, 125,000 job losses, and over 500 businesses, particularly MSMEs, closing down. So it has the disaster, or rather the pandemic, has had substantial ripple effects across our economy, and that has actually reflected in substantial revenue decline, for fiscal revenue decline for the Fijian government. And so we're at a point here where we are holding our breath and hoping that there is no natural disasters that come across that would further exacerbate the situation. A classic example was the fact that when we were at the height of our COVID pandemic here in Fiji in March, when borders were closing down and we were going through a major lockdown, Fiji experienced tropical cyclone Harold, a Category 4 cyclone, in the midst of everything. So the challenge compounded, and in fact, this is very much discussions that the InsuResilience partnership is discussing about how COVID-19 is actually a risk multiplier or vice versa, to climate change. And so for Fiji, what we are doing is trying to rejig ourselves, revamp ourselves, and put on hold our sovereign insurance ambitions, and try to focus more on localized parametric micro insurance solutions that we would like to pilot first, or more so work on what we can bite off what we can chew at the moment. And so what we want to do is on one hand develop a more coordinated approach, policy structure to address climate and disaster risk by developing a climate and disaster risk financing strategy. So we're thinking that while our capacity at the moment, due to COVID-19, to subscribe to a sovereign insurance mechanism is substantially lower, we can still strategize and plan strategically for way ahead before we come to a point where we can subscribe to large-scale parametric solutions. So within that time, we want to do two things. Number one is, like I said, develop this and strengthen our climate and disaster risk financing strategy. Secondly, operationalize it through pilot initiatives, needs testing, market testing. And whilst we needs testing and market testing, get the private sector on board. So eventually, we have, at least the Fijian government has an exit strategy in place, because we in perpetuity do not want to carry on this burden. We want to employ a risk transfer mechanism where we would transfer out the risk that we are burdened with at the moment within the fiscal space to the private sector. So our approach is that policy first, improve yourself, strategize, pilot, agile development, get the private sector on board, and eventually come to a point where we are more economically and fiscally stable. We then subscribe and scale this up further through sovereign insurance solutions. So that would be my response.
Thank you very much. Ultimately, it's about comprehensive risk management, in fact, because if you have a layering of risk, of different risk, compounded risk, you only can cope if you understand all sorts of risks, if you have a broader picture. Looking at the broader picture, and Josh, I think you're agreeing that right now. Josh, I would like to ask you, I mean, how do you see the situation in the Pacific now with the COVID-19 crisis, and what is the Asian Development Bank doing on providing? And I also, after I've asked you, Josh, I would also like, and I prepare Mr. Palu already for the next question, because Mr. Palu, you're the CEO of PIC Greek. PIC Greek also works and operates in the Pacific and with several small island states. Is there any offer, is there any idea, any thought of how to support in this particular situation from the side of PIC Greek? But first, Josh, the floor is yours, and you also can give an introduction into your instruments, probably.
Thank you, Astrid. Yeah, I think the COVID-19 pandemic has really showed us what a large shock can look like. We talk about these protection against these events that are low frequency and high severity, understanding the types of social, economic, financial, and other effects that they can have. And this pandemic has showed us, sadly, what that can look like and how development progress can be at risk of being wiped away. The Asian Development Bank has put together some scenarios, and under some worst case scenarios of containment of the virus, estimates that maybe as many as 400 million people could be pushed into poverty in Asia and the Pacific. And also, I think it was very well brought up in the previous presentation that one large shock doesn't preclude another. We're talking about many countries around the world being affected by this virus, but it doesn't actually remove the risk that a large climate disaster could happen in the coming days in one of these places. So when we're looking at this comprehensive disaster risk management approach that you mentioned, Astrid, it's important, because if a health risk, a pandemic risk, whatever it is, has worn away at a country's resilience or ability to deal with shocks, that's also reduced their resilience to climate shocks. So maybe to put a positive spin wherever it's possible, but let's say that the pandemic has also heightened risk perception and maybe created a momentum for investing into resilience and resilience solutions. The Asian Development Bank has put together a technical note on accelerating climate and disaster resilience, as well as low carbon development through the recovery from the pandemic. Trying to make a point that climate action and economic growth can be complementary. They don't need to be two priorities that are competing against each other. Also, that disaster risk financing solutions need to look very broadly and have that broad risk protection. And maybe to draw on some of the work that ADB has done, ADB has offered contingent disaster financing to 8 Pacific member countries through its policy-based lending mechanism. And all of those 8 member states drew down on that disaster risk financing for their COVID response. And so it was recently announced by ADB that there's a third phase of financing of $94 million for 10 countries in the Pacific, now also including Kiribati and Vanuatu for the first time. Fiji is not in that group, but as you saw from the earlier presentation, they have a number of tools that they're working with. But all of these countries have made significant progress in strengthening the resilience of their institutions and communities, for instance, by putting into place risk-informed investment planning, amongst other things. So I think to summarize, maybe COVID-19 pandemic has shown us how these physical risks can quickly translate into financial risks and how devastating those financial effects can be, and how they also can expose some of the risks and vulnerabilities that exist within our societies. But also remembering that taking action and as we're looking to restart economies and promote economic growth, that doesn't need to be exclusive from taking action on climate. So I mentioned those couple of projects as the work of the Asian Development Bank, but thanks also for the opportunity to talk a little bit about ACLIF, which is the Asia Pacific Climate Finance Fund, which is a multi-donor trust fund managed by ADB and set up with the support of Germany's BMZ. And the fund supports the design and implementation of financial risk management products that aim to scale up the investment that's made into climate change mitigation and climate change adaptation. So we're looking at these types of solutions, whether for insurance or also scaling up investment into climate mitigation, and what are the barriers and gaps that exist in these markets that need to be overcome that ensure that more investment is going into this sector, recognizing that financial risk management instruments can play a role in bridging those gaps. And so the fund is really there to promote innovation within the Asian Development Bank, to look at new types of tools that might be able to scale up this climate investment, but also outside of the Asian Development Bank as well. And so I guess as a sub-objective in supporting some of these insurance engagements, we're looking at the ways that developing these products can also support the development and capacity of local insurance sectors to underwrite these types of products, but also to more strongly engage with the local communities, the climate vulnerable populations, to develop these products in a gender sensitive way, but also in a way that deals with their immediate needs in terms of climate risk.